Welcome to our Coffee Connect on decision making. It's hard to believe it's already December. So we're excited to jump in, and hopefully you can take some of this into your planning for next semester. We are the SEBL Specialists. We are fully staffed across all regions. So I'm Mackenzie Rydell. I serve Region 1, which is ESUs 4, 5, and 6, along with Lincoln Public Schools. And I will let Jill introduce herself.
Perfect. Thanks, Mackenzie. Jill Gunther, SEBL Specialist for Region 3. So that's ESUs 1, 7, and 8.
Good morning. I'm Chandra Essex. I'm the SEBL Specialist for Region 4. So I work with ESUs 9, 10, 11, and 17.
And I am Sarah Gentry. I am the SEBL Specialist for Region 5. I cover ESUs 13, 15, and 16. And then we have Emily, who is not here this morning. So she has another thing mornings. She is our Region 2 SEBL Specialist, and she covers ESUs 2, 3, and OPM.
Awesome. So we're going to start off with our welcoming inclusion activity. We're going to do a winter this or that. So if you want to drop in the chat, or you can even do a reaction. We could do this, a thumbs up, and that. Oh, I don't want to say thumbs down, but I think that's one of the easy ones to click. Let's do a heart. Heart for that, thumbs up for this. So this, do you prefer gloves or that, mittens? We see a heart in there. Oh, we got lots of thumbs. Nice. Thanks for that engagement. Okay. This, peppermint mocha, thumbs up. That, gingerbread latte, thumbs, a heart. Ooh. Oh, we're kind of mixed on that one. Nice. Okay, this, skiing, that, sledding. Thumbs up for skiing, heart for sledding. Oh, we got the sledding crew today. Okay, we'll do one more. This, lots of snow. I love the snow. Or that, I could live without it. Lots of hearts. I agree with that one. I have a love-hate relationship with the snow. We love it the first time, and after that, I'm good. Awesome. Thank you for that engagement. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you're looking forward to the winter. We have our Padlet. It's the same Padlet every time. The link is on the slide, which should be in the chat. And then the password to access that is capital NeMTSS. We'll put some resources in there for decision making today. And then there's also all of the past Coffee Connects with the resources, the slides, and the recordings within there. And to start us off, we have a little quote, and it says, don't access what you won't address, or don't assess what you won't address. We collect lots and lots of data in schools, and sometimes we don't use it. And sometimes we stress ourselves out with collecting the data, but then we don't turn around and actually use it to problem solve and help make decisions. And so just a reminder that if we want to be collecting that data, that we're going to use to address some issues for continuous improvement. Social, emotional, behavioral learning. Again, our definition here is the systematic process for fostering social and emotional skills among both students and adults in order to create safe and supportive environments for positive behavioral and mental health outcomes for all. We include both the adults and the students because we know our adults need those skills in order to model them for students, and also in order to achieve well-being for themselves. And these skills are teachable throughout the lifespan. We have our web on the right side of this slide. So we have those competencies But there's more constructs. So the web kind of shows some of those more definitive skills that we might be teaching in our classrooms. We're redoing this. We are sending it off for final approval, and hopefully in January, you'll get to see the new graphic. Looks pretty slick. And just a reminder how we see that behavior fitting into those social emotional skills. We need some of those skills in order to have wellness in our lives, in order to be career and community and college ready, and also to meet those expectations that we have set in our school buildings. But we also have those expectations and standards and what we strive to be. And so we can use that in order to help identify areas for growth within our social emotional skills. And this is kind of an exciting note. The CDC put out some guidance this past week on mental health, supporting mental health of our students, of our youth. And one of the pillars or checkpoints in order to help support our youth, they called it social and emotional and behavioral learning. And so it's really exciting to see that Nebraska has already started combining that together, and that we knew it was going to catch on. It had kind of trickled in, but it's exciting that guidance came out with the exact language that we're using in Nebraska. So if you haven't accessed that, maybe look it up after the Coffee Connect. So then NeMTSS, we'll talk a little bit about database decision making today. That's one of our 4 essential elements. The other essential elements are layered continuum of support, infrastructure and shared leadership, and that communication and collaboration. And we believe that these are really those foundational things that we need to have in order to build and sustain an effective multi-tiered system of support. So we can use these to build that strong infrastructure to sustain us through our work. And now I'm going to pass it off and we're going to start a video.
Perfect. So this video just does a really nice job. We came across this one. It's a nice little overview of decision rules. So we are going to, like Mackenzie said, just go right into this. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear okay.
Decision rules are really important in being able to really implement NeMTSS. So at the tier 1 level, we need to know and be able to identify, how do we know that what we're doing with all kids is working? And so being able to say, like, at what point do we know that this is a class-wide or a universal problem? So there should be a decision rule in place for that. When we think about identifying students in particular who need services and supports, we need to be able to use our criterion references. So those cut scores that some of those vendors provide to say these students are at risk or are not at risk, and being able to know what those decision rules then are. So then we can be very explicit and very thoughtful about creating plans for students that actually solve the problems. So that's the part of creating the plan and identifying which kids need what. We also have a third set of decision rules that we should be thinking about, which is if after we've implemented these interventions and created the plans, at what point do we know whether we're going to change a plan, continue a plan, or end the plan? And so being able to create those decision rules in advance to make things so much easier when we're evaluating and we're thinking about the data that we have, decision rules have a really important place. Decision rules are
All right, so that video just does a nice overview of when we're thinking about decision rules. We'll get into some examples and things like that a little bit later. But you heard Mackenzie mention those 4 Nebraska NeMTSS essential elements. Today, we're really focusing on the database decision-making essential elements. So really thinking about that balanced assessment system, generating that data, and then that important piece of really utilizing that database decision-making to help us drive those instructional decisions. And it really is what helps guide our continuous improvement as well. And so just some nice reminders there that as we're going through all this, our focus today is really on that database decision-making essential element. When we're thinking about that data within that balanced assessment system, kind of two different areas that we're pulling data from when we're thinking about those data sources. You guys, if you've been with us before, you've probably, been through some of our examples of the different data sources. But when we're thinking about student data, we're really thinking about that like learning well-being data. So maybe it's MAP, maybe it's NSCAS, maybe it's screening data. Maybe it's that those demographic pieces. So things like our high ability learners, numbers in special education, maybe it's mobility rate, things like that. And then perceptual. So maybe it's climate culture surveys and getting information from those. On the flip side there, we also want to be taking a look at the different data sources that we have available when we're thinking about adult data sources. Again, perceptual, so maybe it's climate culture surveys, maybe it's things like our Nebraska NeMTSS self-assessment, maybe it's the PBIS SAS, things like that. And so really thinking about all of those different data sources that we have available. And this just kind of gives us, again, not an exhaustive list, but some different ideas when we're thinking about like those different buckets of data that we're pulling from. We have it outlined here just kind of by system functioning, student academic functioning, student social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health functioning, and then some different examples of like climate culture surveys. And so, again, not an exhaustive list, but gets us thinking about some of those different pieces that we might be able to pull from, whether it be from our student information system, whether it be from some different surveys that we're able to pull from. But really taking a look at those multiple data sources as we get into really talking about those decision rules as well. Continuing on with that, we wanted to just go over, this is a nice where it just kind of outlines some key elements when we're thinking about some of those different assessment types that we have and those questions that we're wanting to answer, that information that we're wanting to gain from those different types of assessments. So if we're thinking about some of those screening assessments, we're really working to answer that question of who might need those additional layers of support, in addition to that core instruction, of course. When we're thinking about those diagnostic assessments, we're really working to answer that question of what kind of help or maybe additional layers do they need? Progress monitoring, really thinking about is what we're doing working? And then those outcome measures, really thinking about what have students learned as a result of that long-term instruction. So this is just kind of a nice breakdown of really thinking about like what information am I getting from some of those different assessments as well. Then really thinking about the why. So when we're thinking about database decision making, we really want to think about like we use that data to really help us determine which kids are in need of that additional support. Our data, like we said, really helps to guide our decision making as we're thinking about that continuous improvement. And when we're thinking about decision rules and really developing those decision rules, we want to make sure that the right students are receiving the right supports. If we're maybe serving too many students, then when we're looking at our decision rules, we might be too loose. We might have decision rules that are maybe too loose and too many kids are maybe receiving support that might be better warranted in beefing up our tier 1 supports and really looking at our core tier 1 supports and what we're doing there. But then on the flip side, we also want to ensure that enough students are receiving also what they're needing. Okay, and that our decision rules aren't too tight, meaning that maybe we aren't serving, again, the right students because our decision rules or kind of what we have established as our criteria, that they don't meet that criteria. Okay, so lots of things to think about and really answers that why is this important? Why do we really want to talk through this? And again, really looking at those multiple data sources as well. You guys are probably familiar with this, our Nebraska MTSS problem solving model. But when we're thinking about database decision making and really working through each of those 5 steps of the problem solving model, this is a nice reminder here with a couple handouts, some different reflection questions that really walk us through and help guide some of those discussions that teams might have at each of the different steps through the problem solving process. When we're thinking about identifying, what is occurring, analyzing why is it occurring, working through that plan phase of what can be done to solve that problem, working through implement, so the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and then our reflection of what did, and then maybe what did not work. What do we need to change as we're moving forward, as we're moving in to that next step? With that, problem solving at all the different levels. So you guys are probably familiar with our teaming structure. So thinking about district level teams, school level teams, collaborative, so like PLCs, grade level, or content area PLCs, and then student support teams. Okay, so thinking about those teaming structures and really thinking about that problem solving at all of the different levels. Okay, when we're thinking about that, each of those teams is going to be looking at those different buckets of data or those different pieces of data from a slightly different lens. Okay, they might be looking at that same data, but really kind of looking at it in slightly different ways. Okay, so another just important reminder there. We're not going to get into like root cause analysis this morning, but we did want to just mention that piece of really working through that root cause analysis, which is happening during that analyze stage of the problem solving process. Our regional leads have put together one of the tip webinars that really walks through some different examples, kind of some guidance through that process. We've also done a webinar using SEBL data to problem solve that kind of gives some different examples and really working through that process as well. But we did just want to mention when we're thinking about that root cause analysis, it can be determined when the cause is something that you can influence and control. You run into a dead end and asking what caused the proposed root cause. Okay, so coming up with just kind of identifying or determining what that final why, that everyone agrees that is the root cause, that the cause is logical, it makes sense, it helps to provide really some clarity around that problem. And then if that cause is dissolved or we work to overcome that cause, there is hope that the problem can be reduced or perhaps even prevented in the future. And so, like I said, we wanted to mention that as we're working through that analyze piece, that we want to be conducting that root cause analysis of our problem statement. Something else worth mentioning here, serviceable base rate. Okay, so really thinking about whatever we determine as our root cause, maybe multiple root causes, right? We also want to be thinking about when we're putting things in place, just some of those variables, some of those things that might come into play as well. One of those being that serviceable base rate, when we're thinking about the number of students that our school is really able to realistically serve. It's also going to be dependent on lots of different pieces. Okay, some of those outlined here. It's going to be dependent on the number of interventions. It's going to be dependent on the number of students supported by that intervention, as well as that time, our materials, our personnel, all things that really come into play when we're thinking about that as well. These are also some great questions when we're thinking about determining that realistic capacity of interventions that we're putting in place. These are some nice questions to really have teams think through, talk through, reflect. Things like how many staff members do we have available to be able to facilitate the intervention? How many students can each of those facilitators be able to provide feedback to? How many students can each teacher observe, rate, provide feedback to, and then to what extent do we have those resources available to be able to support those interventions? So all things that we really want to be able to take a look at and really work to develop kind of that resource mapping, right? Identifying what are we looking at the supports that we have in place, where could we maybe make some changes or potentially make some reallocation changes of resources, whether that be resources in general or people, what that kind of looks like. So just kind of some questions to think about, some good reminders there. We do go into a little bit more of just kind of that step-by-step process of really working through what is serviceable base rate, what is base rate, kind of working through that problem-solving process when we're thinking about interventions in the Screen, Intervene, and Everything in Between webinar. So we wanted to throw that out there as well as just an additional resource when we're thinking about looking at data, being able to identify where that support is needed, taking a look at and recognizing when we're maybe overloading some of those tiers. And the most important reminder, obviously, we can't intervene our way out of a poor or no core. We always want to be taking a look at our tier 1 core supports and how we're strengthening those. I'm going to now turn it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more through some examples of decision rules.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of jump into, again, another video that we found that we thought was really helpful, a resource that you guys can use if you're taking this back to your district or your leadership and you're trying to work through your decision rules. What I really liked about this is it's starting to talk about the early warning indicators that kind of go into your early warning system and helping you determine your serviceable base rate. It walks through, especially if you're in that beginning stage of just collecting data this year, maybe this is your year for collecting baseline data. It kind of talks a little bit about what to do with that and how to compare it to maybe those national standards and when those become warning signs, and just really breaks it down at a local level. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jill hit play on that video and talk about it when we're done.
This is Brian. Staff at Greenbrier School District have become concerned about Brian, a 9th grader at the district's only high school. He's a hardworking student, but has been missing a lot of school lately. This is Brian's principal, Principal Lancaster. Principal Lancaster pays close attention to her students' attendance because a high absence rate is one early sign that a student may be at risk of dropping out. She uses attendance rates, along with other data like behavior and course performance, to identify her at-risk students. Research from across the nation shows that 9th grade students who miss more than 10% of school are at an increased risk of not graduating. This 10% is what is called the cut point, the point at which students are identified for being at risk. Many districts use these early warning indicators as Greenbrier does, relying on cut points that have been proven valid through research across the nation. But will a 10% cut point accurately identify at-risk students like Brian at Greenbrier High School, the only high school in a rural district? And will it be just as accurate at Center City High School, which is located in a large urban district? These indicators could be made even more accurate by using local data. Localizing existing early warning indicators can catch students who might otherwise fall through the cracks. One way for district and school leaders to develop the best indicators and cut points for their students is through this 7-step process. Research has identified more than 100 early warning indicators that can be used to identify students at risk of dropping out. The first stop on this pathway to localizing early warning indicators is to review indicators that have been identified through research and might be appropriate for your district. The next step is to determine which data you have access to that can be used for the new indicators. With data in hand, the next step is for district and school leaders to identify and analyze the patterns and trends relevant to their student outcomes, such as graduation and dropout. For example, Greenbrier School District finds that one cohort of students, the class of 2013, had more students drop out of high school than the classes of 2014 and 2015. Once she knows this, Principal Lancaster decides that analyzing all 3 cohorts, not just the most recent 2, improves the accuracy of her analysis. After exploring patterns and trends, district and school teams will look deeper into their student-level data in relation to desired outcomes. Here, Greenbrier School District staff look at the relationship between attendance and on-time graduation to find that the majority of students missing as little as 8% of the school days in their freshman year fail to graduate with the rest of their cohort, rather than the 10% attendance cut point indicated by national data. If Greenbrier continues to use the 10% cut point, some at-risk students could be overlooked. While an effective cut point should identify students who are likely to drop out, it should not catch too many who would graduate high school without any additional assistance. After identifying indicators and cut points appropriate to local contexts, district and school teams will prioritize indicators in order to achieve the school district's goals. Establishing the reliability of the indicators is the critical next step. So just how reliable are the new indicators? Greenbrier School District staff established reliability of their indicators and cut points by working through this process. They decided to define at risk in their district as students with an attendance rate below 92%, a GPA of 2.3 or lower, one or more out-of-school suspensions per quarter, and failing one or more semester-long class in core academic subjects. Research shows that early warning indicators are useful in identifying students who need additional support to graduate. By customizing these indicators using local data, districts can more accurately identify and then help at-risk students like Brian and get them back on track to graduate on time.
Okay. So it really does kind of summarize really creating that entire process of early warning indicators and determining what those.
Uh-oh, did we lose you, Sarah?
Did I just get kicked off and come back in?
I think so.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. So I don't know what you lost, but that video kind of wraps up, I guess, all of the early warning indicators. We're going to kind of go break that down a little bit. It was a good summary. So thinking about your early warning indicators, we're looking at some different areas. You might want to break it into your grade level academic standards, expectations for behavior. You saw that in the video. They talked about Greenbrier, how many classes they were missing, if they were failing one or more classes. So kind of identifying what your early warning indicators are. Maybe if you're in the very beginning stages, just targeting one area and really figuring out what is our cutoff going to be in that one particular area. And as you do that, then kind of start to compare those different indicators and bring them together to create your full decision rules. So our next slide kind of talks about identifying where those things are at risk. This is just a really nice graphic that shows. Jill, are you doing the slides? Okay, that was really laggy. That was weird. I don't know what's going on with Zoom. So identifying your early warning indicators and putting them kind of in a visual. I liked this graphic because it kind of shows, hey, we're looking at our academic, we're looking at our office discipline referrals. So we're thinking about our behavior data. We're thinking about our attendance. We're thinking, this one doesn't show our SEL screener. Maybe that's assessments, but you could put your SEL screener data in there as well. And then really creating, when are we going to think that our kids are on track, at risk, or off track? And then our next slide kind of breaks that into our tiered interventions. There we go, it's working better. When we have our students that are on track, what are we doing at the universal level, at that tier 1 level for everybody, to make sure that we try to keep as many students as we possibly can in that green zone of we want C or better than C's or C's for all of our students, a higher GPA than 2.5. These are the things that we're doing at that universal level. So kind of putting it into our tiered framework, our layered continuums of support. And then when our kids are at risk, or maybe we need some targeted interventions, what are those? And defining those interventions within the context of our tiers by identifying those risk factors as we go in to kind of create that overall early warning system, really that preventative piece, that guidance that our teachers have to look at, like, okay, wait a minute, we're kind of falling down in this domain. What do we need to do? What do we have to create some support? So maybe if they're just it's office discipline referrals. What's our tier 2? What's our next step that we need to go specifically for this student? So again, you're not overloading students with interventions that they don't need. So really like how that kind of puts it together in kind of those beginning stages of establishing your decision rules. So when we're thinking about our decision rules, we want our problem solving teams to kind of be able to answer these questions. How are you going to determine if your tier 1's effective? Well, if you've got a considerable amount of students that are jumping up, more than, 20% of your students are jumping up into that tier 2, tier 3 area, we know that we might want to, tighten up our core, figure out some additional tier 1 interventions, and beef that up. Like Jill said earlier, you can't intervene your way out of a good core. You need that. Make sure that you have enough at that tier 1 level to keep students at a tier 2 and tier 3 if you can. How are you deciding if students are at risk? So what are those cutoff scores? How are you addressing it? What does your intensified instruction look like? You want to make sure that you can answer these questions as you're drafting out your decision rules. And this is really what keeps you guided as you're planning and building that system. Another resource that you can utilize was created by our NeMTSS team with some support from NDE and our UNL research teams. Is this flow chart that you can use, kind of helps you identify the benchmarks, the different pieces that you need. It's step by step. It really kind of helps you identify if you need to tighten that tier 1 core. It really helps you identify what screening processes you can use, what data collection you might be missing, or maybe you have too much data. Really kind of breaks things down. It's a great resource if you're just in that beginning stage of identifying your decision rules. And then it's important to kind of highlight the importance of making sure that our data that we're collecting is coming from evidence-based, research-based screeners. So these are just some examples of those screeners that we use for social emotional learning. We're talking about the SRSS. That's a good one that you can use. DESA, SABRS, these are all research-based, very common. They have online platforms that help kind of disaggregate that data and put it where students would be, in comparison again to that national cutoff scores that are determined in different research studies. So they kind of classify who's high risk, who's some risk, who's low risk. And in most of these platforms, they also give you some ideas. So they break it down into the T-scores of where the kids score. So on the DESA, say 60 and above, they're saying that there's social emotional strength there. Maybe not so many interventions that you need, but hey, you're doing something great at the core level for this particular student. Once they hit that T-score of 41 to 59, they're a little bit more risk. Maybe there's some additional support you guys can put into place, whatever it might be. So it kind of helps you with these particular screeners where they already have that research-based data figured out. This could be a great baseline. Again, it's super important to then think about your local. If we happen to have a lot of kids that are coming up at that T-score of 41 to 59, we need to go back and kind of think what's working and not working in our local district. So these are kind of those national T-scores that are determined. You just want to make sure that you're really going back and looking at that root cause analysis, going through that problem solving process if you're seeing more students come and score in particular areas. And then the last example that I'm going to share before I turn it over to Chandra is this matrix. So once you've kind of determined what your early warning indicators are, putting them kind of in a chart like this makes it visually, I guess, appealing, simpler for your staff to look at. Okay, wait, now it's time to go into this. So this is just another example of a matrix that you can utilize. There's so many different examples and different kinds, and we're going to share a few more, but this is just a nice one. Really liked how it broke it down into at risk, low risk, high risk, again, making sure that it doesn't put in the data on the universal screener, but you could use what, like I said in the slide before, what the national averages are for the at risk, or you can really do, again, more of a root cause analysis if needed to kind of identify your local indicators. And they include on this one restorative conferences. So if you're doing restorative practices, that can be another one of those examples in your decision rules matrix. And I think I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Chandra now.
Yes. So what you have in front of you on this screen is an example from Bellevue Public Schools. And if you click on the graphic, it'll go into their entire document of their decision rules. And so the neat thing that I wanted to point out for Bellevue is obviously their graphic there talks about majors in minor office referrals, absences, tardies, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, their visits to the health office, externalizing and internalizing data. And so it has that low risk, high risk. So that is a great piece to start, and it's a great example. But also, if you click on their the document and scroll down at the very bottom, it does also link to kind of those questions that Sarah was discussing. Is how do we know what you need to strengthen? Is it a tier 1 intervention? Looking at tier 1, and so and the graphic it shows that more than 40% of students receive 1 or more office referrals. If more than 2.5 office referrals from students are happening, that indicates to the school, to Bellevue, that they need to work on their school-wide system. So they even dug down a little bit more in their problem-solving model of what data will indicate what they need to strengthen at tier 1. Is it a school-wide system? Is it their non-classroom system? So again, just thinking through what that data will look like. The next example we have is from, I think we borrowed this from ESU 3 that just shows, again, these are high school indicators in a little bit different process, different way of looking at that career and college readiness piece. Are they on track? Are they at risk? Are they off track? Extremely off track? What do those look like? So this, again, if we think back to the video that Sarah had showed with our early warning system, the goal obviously is having students graduate being career and college ready on time. So knowing that if students are on there or they're on track is where you want, and if they are falling into those other areas, how you would put them in additional supports. Another example we wanted to share, this slide comes from a presentation on chronic absenteeism that our Region 3, Britt Gabers and Dr. Shirley Vargas from NDE put together. And so it breaks down based on attendance and looking at, again, what are those points that are talking about where a student would be at risk, where they would need additional support. So it's broken down based on tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So what you would do in each tier. And this is a great graphic for you to create or to have in your district to show your staff, again, where students are landing and what is based off of your data for your district, for your school, what puts a student at risk, with the end goal of making sure that they're able to graduate on time, be career and college ready, that they're able to be successful inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So again, we just wanted to always share a number of different resources. So again, this is another example of matching available interventions to that function and the need, and then being able to pull out what type of options that would work best for that individual student after they get into the needs of tier 2 or tier 3. So based on those needs, maybe it's increased opportunities for positive adult attention. That's the function that the student needs to be strengthened. So putting them into a check-in, check-out program, maybe engaging them in a social or organizational skills group, a mentoring program, and you can see that example there. So the one thing we want to make sure and just reference is that implementation of those decision rules to include thinking about where that data is, thinking about what the frequency, the duration, the intensity of the intervention is based on the student's performance data. Make sure you're regularly reviewing the data. So once you create your decision rules, it's not a static piece that then you just put on a shelf and you always use. You want to continue to look at, are those still being met? Are those still good indicators of where a student's success rate will be based on our decision rules? Making sure, again, that you have sufficient number of data points collected over the period of time, analyzing and learning that trajectory or those trends, comparing against grade appropriate achievement. So again, if we think back to the video that Sarah had showed on early warning systems, what's the national data compared to your own data? And then the graphical representation of your data. Because again, we think about all of our different learners, our staff, our stakeholders, our parents, they need to see data in a different way. So not just in a number format, but maybe in a graphical format can help with that visual analysis of those trends. And then that treatment of fidelity. We want to think about the fidelity of our interventions, the fidelity of our data, and how those all play well together. So when we think about our decision roles, one of the last things we wanted to leave you with is measuring of that quality. And again, we have a nice resource here for you in measuring that quality of your data. The grid allows you to examine those decision rules that you have. So what do they allow you to do is a question. How do you do them? What's the evidence? And then what are the gaps? What needs to be done in regards to your decision rules and what that quality measurement is? Because if we remember, we don't know how we're doing until we measure it. So we wanted to leave you with a fun little graphic there of your dancing penguin when we think about high quality data. We have found that memes can be put into our presentation, so we like to throw that in for fun. So we hope that you have gathered some great information today. We are announcing our Spring Coffee Connect series. They are starting in January, February, March, April, and then we'll have one in May, and of course one in July. You can register there at the link, or you can scan the QR code. We are going back to addressing Coffee Connects around our core competencies. So we're excited to see you join for one of those. And we'd also like to announce our spring events that are happening around not only our Coffee Connects, but our Tier 2. If you remember, we put out our suggested roadmap. Tier 1 trainings we did this fall, and we will be addressing Tier 2. So we would encourage you to sign up. We would love to see you all. And as always, we have our exit ticket. We would love to hear your feedback. Give us the goods and the bads and everything in between of how we did, how this information was impactful for you. And then if you would like to have a certificate of attendance, you can also fill that out on the exit ticket and it should come to you directly. So join us for our next Coffee Connect on January 24th. And what I would like to just end on is our optimistic closure. So even though this poor little snowman is in the rain and sometimes we can get some winter blues, we always want to think about that this is a fun and enjoyable time as we close out our fall semester and the winter chill sets in. So we want you to take a moment just to think about how you're planning to take care of yourself and help spread the warmth into your school community. So you can do that personally, or if you'd like to put something in the chat, we'd love to hear it. But just think about how you're going to take care of yourself, rejuvenate, refresh over the break, and get it ready to go for your spring semester. So with that, thank you for joining us again today. We are the SEBL specialists for the state, along with our regional teams. So if you have anything that you would need from us, our contact information can be found on the last slide. So thank you for joining us today.